Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. We talk about two things on this program. Number one, we talk about the Constitution of our religion, that is Christianity, and that is the Holy Bible, the final revelation from God to man. Jude verse 3, contend earnestly for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. And we talk about number two, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution is the founding document, or I should say, it is the organizing instrument of our nation, the Declaration of Independence, the founding document. So right now we're looking at the Constitution, and we're talking about foreign aid. Donald Trump talking about getting rid of USAID, USAID, as a foreign aid instrument, and that has caused the Democrats to absolutely lose their minds. Just listen to some of these very quickly.
Privileged billionaires who don't give a damn about America and Americans should not be making decisions that put Americans at harm.
We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk.
Elon Musk may get to be dictator of Tesla, but he doesn't, and he may try to play dictator here in Washington, D.C., but he doesn't get to shut down the Agency for International Development.
This is all a smokescreen, a shell game, in order to turn this government over to a handful of unelected billionaires.
Well, there's just some of the Democratic reaction to President Trump shutting down or at least curtailing the foreign aid through the U.S. aid. I think maybe a good rule of thumb is this: the louder the Democrats squeal, the more on target Trump is with the Constitution. And by the way, these individuals, I don't care whether they're great lawyers or great attorneys, or whatever they may be, they don't know the Constitution at all. As a matter of fact, Ilhan Omar had stated in her comments also, that was not recorded there, that this is unconstitutional to shut down USAID. I thought, they don't even know what the Constitution is. They have not read it. So let's talk about foreign aid. Let's talk about U.S. aid for just a few moments. Foreign aid, money taken from the United States, sent overseas to other countries, is nothing less than international socialism. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. There is not constitutional authority for one single dollar of taxpayer money to go overseas to another nation, for whatever purpose it may be. You find it in the Constitution. You tell me where it is in the Constitution. It's not there. It's all part of the socialistic New Deal type of programs that was started by FDR. And I saw one tweet that said this. One remark on X said, well, you know what? Trump is getting rid of all of Biden's stuff, but we didn't know he's going to go all the way back to FDR. Well, apparently so, and need to be, because we have been on a socialistic track from the time of Woodrow Wilson. Let's talk about foreign aid. Foreign aid, here's how it is defined: the hard-earned money taken from U.S. taxpayers, redistributed abroad according to the whims of globalist micromanagers. It is viewed by its most doctrinaire supporters not just as a remedy for suffering of the world's poor, but just as a just imposition on the greedy, exploitative, unfairly affluent West. Democrats such as Obama said they would double foreign aid. That was to, as he said, improve America's image abroad. President Bush doubled developmental assistance abroad. But Donald Trump, he's a president of a different type. And he says, let's go back and examine everything. And DOJ, the Department of Government Efficiency, is looking at it saying, look what's going on. And it has caused alarm bells to ring with those who are interested in the Constitution, which we've been talking about this for a long, long time. But now, talking about cutting it back, the Democrats are losing their little minds. Well, international socialism is what America has been practicing with foreign aid. We'll talk about the history of it in brief here just a moment. But really, it has had the opposite effect of its intended results. Like all socialistic programs, the opposite effect is what occurs. We're not punishing the rich in America. That's what International Socialism or National Socialism is all about. That is punishing the rich and rewarding the middle class and the poor. No, what happens is it's a burden on the middle class. That's why the wealthy have increased the number of wealthy persons in Biden administration, and the middle class was burdened. That's what's happening. That's what always happens. Number two, the aid almost always goes to the governments of socialistic countries and other peoples, not the people themselves. The governments, the dictatorships, those who micromanage their populations, and it doesn't go to the people. And these dictators build monuments to their own vanity. That's what happens with the money that we send overseas. But liberals always wish to reinvent assistance, and so they've come up with foreign aid monies. We can't get rid of our money fast enough, unconstitutional though it may be. From the time of FDR forward, we have shoveled billions upon billions and billions of taxpayer money overseas through one entity or another. Let's talk about some of them. From the Congressional Research Service report for Congress, this was from 2004, it said, an essential instrument in foreign policy is foreign aid. An essential instrument in foreign policy. I wonder how in the world did people such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, how did the Andrew Jacksons, how did people, even up through Abraham Lincoln and forward, how did they possibly have any kind of foreign policy that was successful? Well, according to the modern thinking, they didn't, because we have to give them money. But the government takes your money, throws it overseas. And that's the cornerstone of American foreign policy today. So, several years ago, 192 countries in the world, the U.S. was giving money to 174 of those nations. We have aided regimes, and repressive ones too, by the way, in Africa, in the Mideast, adversaries like Kim Jong II in North Korea, even China, whose economy was roaring there about 9% per year, while ours was always flat. We were still robbing the American taxpayer, putting money overseas. China was growing. This was during the coronavirus pandemic. All nations were flat. This was 2.5 years ago. China, though, was growing at 2.3%. How did that happen? Because we continue to funnel our money overseas through the back door of the USAID was one of them. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this year, I don't know what the projections are, but about 3 years ago, it was 6%. But the USAID website reported that China itself received 3 years ago, $29 million, US dollars, taxpayer money, $29 million through USAID. That's only the USAID. There's other entities also that send money overseas. So let's talk about the roots of some of this, going back to the period of 1936. The Exchange Stabilization Fund. It was set up to stabilize, supposedly, foreign currencies. Franklin Roosevelt. Now, here's the deal. All of these presidents, Republican and Democrat, have been about internationalism first. First, internationalism that has built up other countries and robbing the American people to do so. FDR was confiscating private property in the United States. That's hard to believe. Confiscating properties, causing farmers to destroy half their crops, causing farmers to destroy some of the animals, such as the pigs, the hogs that they had for the bacon. He was trying to stabilize the prices of bacon. Well, this kind of thing was going on at the same time, confiscating private property, destroying private property. That was the U.S. government under FDR. They were using international currency manipulation to cover all of this. So Mexico had the first grant, the first load, money given to them, 1936, January of that year, the exchange between the treasuries. The Exchange Stabilization Fund, the ESF, quietly enlarged issues to bail out Mexico. Here's what researcher Anna Schwarz had to say about it. Congress ceded to the executive branch the power to extend foreign aid without prior congressional approval. Remember that. Congress conceded or ceded to the executive branch the power to extend foreign aid without prior congressional approval. Now you'll see when Trump, who is right now saying we're going to cut back this foreign aid, boy, they are absolutely having conniption fits. 1995, Mexico received a bailout. This was Clinton. It was under the ESF funds, $12 billion to bail Mexico out. Why is it that we have to bail all these countries out with U.S. taxpayer money? Then comes in 1946. That was ESF, 1936. Now 1946, the International Monetary Fund, founded as part of the Bretton Woods Act. John Maynard Keynes, a socialist, Harry Dexter White, a Russian agent in the FDR White House. And it began small because that's how they always do it. They begin small, just like the IRS, just like the income tax. They said the income tax, we're going to just tax so much of your money, 10% of the money, only if you make so much money. Now they're everywhere. Well, and that's another issue we need to get to, but we'll not have time in this one, but we need to get rid of the income tax. Anyway, so they began small with the IMF. Harry Dexter White stated the purpose of it. I want you to hear what Harry Dexter White, he was an insider in FDR's administration, what he had to say about the IMF and the purpose of it. He said it was to pierce at the weakest points extreme nationalism, and that a, quote, breach must be made and widened in the outmoded and disastrous economic policy of each country for itself and the devil take the weakest, end of quote. That is to say, translation, the IMF was used as an international level, or how are we going to bring up the other nations and bring us down so that we can all be equal at an international level? Or that's exactly what Harry Dexter White was about. Well, he was a socialist. That's what he wanted. And so through FDR's administration, the IMF began. So it used to be the IMF was the chief supplier of money. They also stockpiled gold, but the U.S. used to have it, but no more. It was going over to the IMF. Then you have the World Bank. That was not enough. Then we have to have the World Bank. Specializes in loans below market rates to foreign countries. Who picks up the tab when the foreign countries, maybe a third world country, cannot pay for it? Who picks up the tab? You do. I do. The U.S. taxpayer picks up the tab when they don't pay. The U.S. capital stock in the World Bank, now this was of June 2000. We'll give you an updated number in just a moment. In June of 2000, it was $569 million. That was at that time more than 1/4 of its $2.3 billion of the World Bank. Today, do you know how much it is? The American contribution? $10 billion. You wonder why America is in such financial straits, while we have gotten into so far in debt that we can't even take care of our own people because we are too busy with international socialism, spreading it around through the International Monetary Fund, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and the World Bank. That's why. And that is a laundering organization. We put the money to the banks, they wash it, they send it to other nations. That's what's going on. Then you have now what Trump has overturned, and this has gotten the Democrats so excited, and the USAID. So in 1961, John Kennedy, who was conservative compared to today's standards of Democrats, he thought we were just not getting our money quick enough to the other countries. We were already funneling it through and laundering our money through the World Bank and the IMF and the ESF. But that's just not fast enough. We've got to get it directly there. So he created the USAID program. And here's how he put it. There is no escaping our obligations, our economic obligations. For widespread poverty and chaos lead to a collapse of existing political structures, inviting advance of totalitarianism, end of quote. we're going to find out, and he already knew at that time, that money sent overseas doesn't work. And there's several reasons for that, because it's the idea of government, a limited government that allows people to unleash their own freedoms. That's what works, not just pouring money on the problem. But be that as it may, he thought, well, we're going to have to stop this widespread poverty. Not only so, but Clinton came along later. We'll read this statement to you in a moment. And he said, you know what? We've sent so much money over there, but there has been no appreciable difference in any of these countries. We're not making any difference with all the billions of dollars we sent. But JFK wanted to send money more directly. And so we started sending in through the USAID. And since that time, it has ballooned into this massive other government organization. So Trump talked about closing it. That would be one of the most significant changes in our entire foreign policy establishment and entire ideas of socialism, which is what our foreign policy has been about. To change that up, this is earth-shattering, really. To change, or to even to talk about closing the USAID. That's why the Democrats are absolutely just too excited. They can't stand and talk about it. They can't even think about it. They're just losing their minds, as I said. Now, the Democrats want us to believe that it's only a relief system. We're going to send bags of rice and that kind of thing. That is baloney. That is a lie. USAID is part of a regime change system around the world, because the United States, with our foreign policy that's through the State Department, has been putting its fingers in, get our noses in everybody's business around the world. Everyone's. We're spending billions of dollars each year propping up NGOs, non-government organizations overseas that function as shadow governments, undermining duly elected governments around the world. The U.S. is meddling in internal affairs in foreign countries all over the globe. So Trump announced a 90-day pause on some of these expenditures. And you know what happened immediately? For example, just as an illustration, Ron Paul brings this out. He pointed out Ukraine press outlets were scrambling to keep their doors open, because when U.S. money quits flowing in, this means there is no independent media in the Ukraine, only fake news outlets willing to toe the U.S. administration propaganda line. He goes on to say, this is Ron Paul speaking, this is immoral and it's dangerous. That is exactly right. It is immoral. It's immoral to do it. It's dangerous. It also means that everything about Ukraine that we've been hearing through the mainstream media is written by U.S. government-backed media outlets. Think about, for example, the United States government-funded radio program. That goes on. You know what? If you listen to that, then you yourself are being indoctrinated with propaganda on a continual basis. It's all towing a liberal line. That's what happens when the government gets involved in putting out the news. Well, that's what happens here, and that's what's going on in Ukraine. So all the information coming out of Ukraine, funneled through by means of our money, then funneled through the mainstream media. It's a closed propaganda loop that peddles false information. That's how Ron Paul puts it, and he's exactly right. This is why many people in Washington want to continue the U.S. aid, so they can continue the propaganda lines with Ukraine that keeps us in the war, to keep us in internationalism, instead of focusing upon our own nation, our own people. You know what? You see on television people all the time, poor people, whether it be Hispanics, whites, white people in East Kentucky, blacks in Cincinnati, saying, or in Chicago, saying, we're giving so much money away. We're living in poverty here. Why can't we help our own people? Well, this is why. Because of the International Socialism. The U.S. aid also has funneled $53 million to the EcoHealth Alliance to support gain-of-function research on coronaviruses at, you guessed it, the Wuhan lab. Did Americans help fund COVID? You see, we're blaming Fauci and I do, but we should also blame the government generally that funneled his Wuhan lab money. But the point is, Americans have a right to know. Americans have a right to know what is being done with our money. But I tell you what, the Democrats do not like that. They don't want that. They are absolutely angry at this particular point. Now, there are other organizations by which we funnel money overseas also. We give aid and comfort to communist nations all over the world, the former Soviet Union, Ceausescu's Romania, China, African dictatorships. China has the most favored nation status. Once again, Ron Paul makes a comment here. He said, free trade is allowing individuals to exchange goods and services, not forcing Americans to subsidize it with their involuntary tax dollars, a brutal regime that runs completely contrary to our system of government. I hope you got that. That's a good point, and that is, okay, people say, what about the poverty that's overseas? Then you funnel your money out on your own, because that is charitable giving. The difference is as easy as elementary children can see. It's this difference of me standing up in the pulpit on Sunday and saying, please give, we're passing a plate around for the work of the church here because there are people that we're feeding, and me standing in the back in the foyer with a gun saying, okay, now you're going to put into the plate this money, and then we're going to use that money to do what we want to do. Well, that's the difference. If people are interested in the poverty in Mexico, the poverty in Central America, that's great. But don't make it a government program by which you leverage money out of me and send it to your pet projects. I give where I give. But that's how giving ought to be. Private donation. So free trade allows individuals to exchange goods and services. Don't force Americans to subsidize with their involuntary tax dollars to a brutal regime that runs completely contrary to our system of government. But what happens is the Democrats have been controlling this government for so long, since the period of Woodrow Wilson, practically, almost completely. They've been controlling it. That is internationalists, whether it be Republicans or Democrats, internationalists, they've been controlling it, and they've been leveraging money out of the taxpayers and sending it to regimes all over the world. Let them collapse. Let them collapse. I heard, matter of fact, a man that escaped out of the former Soviet Union. I heard him about 30 years ago. He had escaped out of the former Soviet Union, and he stood up and he said, and it was a huge ballroom full of people that were preachers that were there and people that were influential in America. And he said, look, he said, I'm telling you, America, the Soviet Union would have collapsed long ago if America had not continued to prop it up through FDR's foreign exchange program, through the International Monetary Fund, through the World Bank, and through these other organizations. You people have propped it up and propped up a slave regime. He says, stop it, because you're keeping people enslaved over there. But, you know, we got that going, and it's hard to change things back. Trump is trying to. So what is the real backbone of this policy? That is the International Monetary Fund, USAID. What is the real backbone? The philosophy is internationalism, that is world socialism. When you see internationalism, it's world socialism. Nationalism has become a bad word, and thus this is exactly why Trump has been hated, because people have been propagandized to believe that we should be internationalists, the world first, America last. He says America first. That's how the universities, or that's why they hate him. I told you I'd read something from Bill Clinton, and here's one of the last things I want to point out. Bill Clinton had a task force, talked about foreign aid, and they admitted failure. And here's what he had to say. Here's what his task force wrote. Despite decades of foreign assistance, most of the Africa and parts of Latin America, Asia, and Mideast are economically worse off than they were 20 years ago. Well, let that sink in. We funnel all this money overseas, and they are worse off. That's because we're not looking at how we are giving our money. And giving voluntarily should be just that, a voluntary, free will contribution of people who are Christians in this nation. Actually, Americans, when there's disaster overseas, we've been the number one giver. We have topped every nation giving. The American people have come together, but that's how it ought to be done. Free will giving and not leveraging tax money through the USAID. USAID doesn't need simply to trim its budget and streamline its efforts. It needs to close its doors, and I hope that you support President Trump in so doing.